So I'm going to defend Massie yet again. Now, let me preface this. Thomas Massie is out of Kentucky. He is not my congressman. It's unfortunate. I would actually like him to be. He is probably, in my opinion, the best congressman that we've had in, I don't know, decades? Long time. Very long time. Okay? I don't know exactly how long, but quite a while. What makes him so great? Number one, he means it when he says he's conservative. He means it when he says he wants to reduce government. He means it when he says, I want to protect your civil liberties. We know he means it because he takes a lot of flack for it. Because he'll do something, and then he'll come out, and he'll explain why he did it. Now, that's one of the things that I think that really gets people to really support and like him, is that he doesn't just vote according to how people think, people in the liberty sphere think he should vote. He comes out and he explains his vote, and we're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I get it. Because sometimes his votes seem like they may be, counter to what he's trying to accomplish or what he's telling us he's trying to accomplish. But then when he gives the explanation, we're all like, oh, yeah, of course, that makes sense. And one complaint that I see a lot that doesn't get much attention is people go, oh, yeah, people like me will say, hey, Thomas Massie's, he's a great congressman. Why is Trump going after him? This is ridiculous. Why is he creating a PAC to try to unseat him? Why is AIPAC trying to spend $300,000-$400,000 to unseat him? This is nonsense, And people will immediately go, oh, yeah? Well, if he's so great, what legislation has he ever gotten passed? And I'm like, and that was an interesting question. And I think the answer to that is not going to be one that people who are asking it are prepared for or even want to hear, because it kind of means that they don't know what they're talking about. So I happen to find something. This is govtrack.us. You can go there. They literally have report cards on all the members of Congress. And so let's take a look. So their report cards. Now, this one is for 2024, so it's going to cover the 118th Congress, the current Congress that we have. And it says, I love this. These statistics dissect the legislative records of members of Congress during the 118th Congress from January 2023 to January 2025. A higher or low, I love this. This starts out, a higher or lower number doesn't necessarily make a legislator any better or worse or more or less effective than other members of Congress. We present these statistics for you to understand the quantitative aspects of legislating and make your own judgments based on what legislative activities you think are important. Keep in mind that there are many important aspects of being a legislator besides what can be measured, such as constituent services and performing oversight of the executive branch, which aren't reflected here. So in other words, we're starting off and we're saying, like, look, just because you see a big number or a small number, that doesn't really say anything about how effective they are. That just means they got a big number or a small number. This is quantifying it. We're putting numbers to things. So down here, bills introduced. All right. Number 1, Representative Biggs, Arizona, 612 bills introduced, followed by Representative Norton, 128. And then we've got down here at the bottom, Lee Carter, Ruley, and Weed from Texas, Ohio, and Wisconsin, all with 0. So I thought, since everybody's so worried about which bills Thomas Massie has gotten, he has sponsored and gotten all the way through to enacting into law, I figured I would take a look because I was curious. I was like, all right, let's explore this idea. So we look and we see that Representative Andy Biggs, who we just talked about a moment ago, he's introduced the most bills compared to all representatives in the current Congress. He introduced 612 bills. Man, this guy must be phenomenal, right? 612 is a big number. Okay? Well, let's see here. Biggs introduced one bill that became law, including via incorporation into other measures in the 118th Congress. 1. So 612 to 1. Okay, now I'm not dogging on him. I'm just kind of pointing out that's a bit of a gap. He submitted 612. 1 ended up becoming law. Now, some of those bills, because Congress is still in session, it's possible that he may get more enacted later. But currently, as of July 8th, he has 1 bill enacted out of 612 for this current congressional session. But here's the real question. For all of you Thomas Massie haters, how many of you even know who Andy Biggs is? Come on, don't lie. Don't lie. You know you have no idea who this man is. Unless he's your representative. If you're in Arizona, District 5, which is where he's out of, you should know him, but there's a chance that you won't because a lot of people don't know who their representatives are. If you're in Arizona, you might know him depending on whether or not he gets mentioned a lot through media and whatever else, online and whatnot. So if he's got like some sort of popularity in Arizona, then you might know who he is. But more than likely, if you're hating on Massie, you ain't never heard of this man. Now, who you should really know is Representative Don Bacon out of Nebraska. Why is that? So he wrote the most laws compared to all representatives. Bacon introduced 9 bills that became law. 9. Here they are. Space Force Legacy, Multipolar Deterrence Research, Strategic Defense Fellows Act, Bipartisan Keep America Open Act, Fighter Force Preservation Act, Air Force Future Force Design, Strategic Defense Fellows Program Act, Military Cyber Defense, Defense Hackathon. Are you noticing a trend here? Anybody notice one? If you said military, bingo. This man wrote like 9 bills that got that ended up into law. He's got the most for this congressional session, and they're all related to our military industrial complex. Complex. Yes, complex. That's what I meant to say. I was thinking of something else. Our military industrial complex. All 9 of them, I think. Well, maybe the Keep America Open Act. Maybe that's something else. I'd have to look at it. But just by the title alone, the rest of them, you're pretty clear what they are. So 9 bills. So ask yourself, when haters come across and they're like, oh yeah, well, how many bills has he put into has he got enacted into law? You can go, well, 0. Now tell me which Congress member has got the most bills enacted into law this session. Just throw that out there. Ask him, like, who is it? Hey, now it's on the internet, so people could go look it up pretty quickly. But the chances are they don't know, right? Because this is a man that's out of Nebraska. How many people that pay attention to politics know, Nebraska's 2nd District representative? How many people in Nebraska know the 2nd District representative? Because it's pretty common for people to not know even their own representative or representatives elsewhere in the state, much less some representative outside of the state. So why am I pointing this out? Well, Don Bacon has the most pieces of legislation that he authored that went into law, 9 of them. Andy Biggs has introduced the most by far, 612, again, this Congress, with only 1 being enacted. And then if we want to look at just how many of Don Bacon's pieces of legislation that he's introduced altogether, well, we can get that number 2. He's introduced the 13th most bills compared to all representatives. He's tied with somebody else. Bacon introduced 65 bills. So he introduced 65 bills, and out of those, 9 of them were passed, all of them to the military-industrial complex. But you should ask them. You should, hey, how many? How many should Thomas Massie have authored? What's the number exactly? And how many does the person who has the most, how many do they have? How many, for the person who has the most introduced, how many do they have? Do you know these numbers? And someone might go, It's not my job to know about some random. Whoa, whoa. No. If you're making the argument that Thomas Massie is a bad Congress member because he hasn't gotten the most bills passed, right? Then you should probably know who has. Otherwise, what are you comparing to? You're making stuff up, right? Because you don't know anything about who has the most, why they have the most. You don't know anything about that. So I think it's a canard altogether. People are just saying that. And it's really funny because I had a friend years ago. He was he's a Democrat, and he would complain. He would be like, I think it was a Republican Congress at the time. And he's like, this is the most do nothing Congress. And I'm like, well, that sounds good to me. Like, I don't know why that's a bad thing. And he's like, well, they don't do anything. They're just arguing and this and that. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, they should be passing laws. I'm like, about what? What laws can you tell me right off the top of your head that they should be passing? And he didn't know. And I'm like, well, if you don't know, how can you complain? Like, you should have a list of like 10 bills. Okay, maybe not 10, at least 5. You should be able to say, here are 5 things that I think, Congress should be doing before I start saying, do nothing Congress. The whole problem here is that people are looking for superficial things to justify their anger or whatever. So they're mad at Thomas Massie because he didn't support the most recent big, beautiful bill. And I was like, oh, I can't believe Trump had a mandate. We've talked about the mandate before, how that doesn't, like people say, oh, Trump's got a mandate because he won the election. And okay, well, then everywhere else where you have an executive, like a mayor or a governor, they have a mandate too if they want. That's how this works. Also, where you have the legislative, so you have your you have your House and you have your Senate at the federal level, you have it at the state level, and then you have your city council at the local level. They have a mandate too, because they also won an election and they campaigned on doing certain things. I will do this. I will do that. I won't do this. I will tell you that. Whatever, right? They campaigned on certain things and people said, I like that person. I'm going to vote for them. They have a mandate as well. You don't get to just say the president has a mandate and everybody else has to succumb to whatever he wants. Because if that's the case, why the hell would we vote for anybody else? Literally, just vote one person, make him king. If that's what you want, make him king. But I promise you, I know some MAGA people out there like, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. You say that now until the king gets everything he wants. Then you're going to find out this wasn't such a good idea. Basically, this arguments against Thomas Massie boil down to ignorance. Okay? How many bills somebody got, that they authored that went into law? That doesn't say anything. People like to think it does. They're like, oh, well, that means he couldn't convince all of his peers. Okay, why is it his job to be convincing? Don't you know your role? Your role as a citizen is to reach out to your constituents. To reach out to your representatives, because you're their constituent, and tell them, I want you to vote on this. I don't want you to vote on this. That is your job. They are your employees. And yet you're like, okay, this one person is supposed to convince, 434 other people. That's his job. And if he can't do it, well, then he must be a bad congressman. Okay. Well, if you can't convince your one representative to do something, to vote for something or against it, what does that say about you? Right? Are you just a crappy citizen? Right? Because you couldn't even convince one person. You want Thomas Massie to convince 434 people. You can't convince one. I doubt that any of the grandstanders, the real grandstanders, okay? Thomas Massie people say that he's a grandstander, but that's really just some BS garbage that they make up. The real grandstanders who oppose Massie, I doubt that most of them could tell you who had the most bills enacted, the topics that covered those bills, and then most importantly, whether or not they agree or disagree with that legislation and why. So I want you to think about that for a second. Somebody's criticizing Thomas Massie. So ask him, do you know who Don Bacon is? Just ask him that. Like, who's Don Bacon? I'm like, how would I know? More than likely is going to be their answer. Well, if passage of legislation is so important to you, don't you think it's reasonable for you to know the person who has passed the most bills out of Congress as of right now? Don't you think that you should know that? Well, okay. And then they'll probably make up some argument, right? You say, no. You hold them to the fire. You say, no. You started this. Let's take it to its proper conclusion. Let's see how much you actually know about the argument you are making. So you don't know who Representative Don Bacon is. You don't know that he's passed 9 bills currently in Congress. And when I say he's passed, I mean he's authored. I'm using that as shorthand to say he's authored 9 bills that went on to be signed by the president. Okay? You don't know the topic of those bills, and so you certainly can't tell me whether or not you agree or disagree with the legislation. So ultimately, you're grandstanding about Massie because you're acting like a little petulant child, stomping your feet because he didn't do what you wanted him to do. But he did do what his constituents wanted him to do. That's why they keep voting him. He's been there since 2012. He's been there for over 10 years. About 12 years or so. And for 12 years, he keeps getting reelected, even when people run campaigns against him. In his last election, he ran against, he didn't really run against, but AIPAC spent like $300,000 to $400,000 to try to unseat him, and they failed. He won his seat again. Why? Because he communicates with his constituents. He comes out and he tells you, I voted yes for this, I voted no for this, and here's why. And people like him. And so when people try to come in and say, oh, well, Thomas Massie always votes no, or Thomas Massie this or that, for us who support him, you're not going to tell us anything that we don't already know. In fact, you're probably behind. You probably don't. Because the reason that we like him is not just because he votes the way we want, because we understand why he voted that way. We can understand, oh, you did vote for this back under Biden. Why did you do that? Because I negotiated something that I thought would be beneficial going forward. And we can look and say, you're right, that was beneficial. Great negotiating. So skip all the noise. That's your defense. When people come at him, when they say how many pieces of legislation, say how many should he have? How many pieces of legislation did the person who had the most go through the process and become law? What's that number? And if they can't tell you 9, and if they can't tell you that it's Representative Bacon from Nebraska, then this whole line of argument is nonsense, and you should point it out to them, laugh, and then move on.